And the Silent Guardian, a mystery unveiled. Picture this, a lone B-17 flying fortress, engines droning through the frigid air over Germany in December 1943. The bomber's crew has just completed another harrowing mission, their aircraft scarred by flak bursts and fighter attacks. But something is different about this particular flight home. Something that would remain classified for decades to come. Hidden within the bomber's defensive systems lies a technological marvel so revolutionary, so closely guarded, that even the crew operating it doesn't fully understand what they're using. It's a device no larger than a milk bottle, yet it possesses the power to shift the entire balance of aerial warfare. The Germans call the effects they're witnessing the American miracle. What they don't know is that they're witnessing the deployment of one of the war's most closely held secrets. Tonight, we're going to explore the story of the proximity Fuze, a weapon so advanced, so game-changing, that it remained classified long after the atomic bomb became public knowledge. This is the tale of how a small team of brilliant scientists and engineers created what many consider the second most important secret weapon of World War II, and perhaps more remarkably, how they managed to keep it secret. But our story doesn't begin in a laboratory or a military briefing room. It begins with a problem that had plagued military commanders for centuries. How do you hit a moving target in three-dimensional space when that target is actively trying not to be hit? Consider the mathematics of the challenge. An anti-aircraft gun crew in 1940 faced an almost impossible task. They had to calculate the future position of an aircraft moving at perhaps 300 miles per hour, factor in wind speed and direction, account for the ballistic trajectory of their shell, and set a mechanical timer that would detonate their projectile at precisely the right moment. All of this while under enemy fire, and often in the dark. The traditional solution was the time fuse, a clockwork mechanism that would explode the shell after a predetermined number of seconds. Gun crews would estimate the target's altitude, calculate the flight time, set their fuses accordingly, and hope for the best. It was, to put it mildly, an inexact science. Studies showed that it took an average of 2,500 anti-aircraft rounds to bring down a single enemy aircraft. Those numbers weren't just statistics. They represented tons of precious steel and explosive materials, thousands of man-hours of manufacturing. And most critically, they represented bombers that were getting through to their targets. By 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged overhead, it became clear that something had to change. The Luftwaffe's aircraft were becoming faster, more maneuverable. Traditional anti-aircraft defenses were proving inadequate against modern aerial warfare. British scientists, already stretched thin across dozens of urgent wartime projects, began to contemplate what seemed impossible: a shell that could sense its target and explode at exactly the right moment. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn. The breakthrough wouldn't come from Britain, despite their desperate need. It wouldn't come from Germany, despite their advanced engineering capabilities. Instead, it would emerge from an unlikely collaboration between American scientists and a technology that most military minds hadn't even considered applicable to warfare: radio. The concept was elegant in its simplicity, yet fiendishly complex in execution. What if you could create a miniature radio transmitter and receiver, small enough to fit inside an artillery shell, robust enough to survive the tremendous forces of being fired from a gun, and sensitive enough to detect the presence of an aircraft and trigger an explosion at precisely the right distance? Remember, we're talking about 1940. Radio technology was still relatively primitive. Vacuum tubes were fragile, bulky devices. The idea of creating a radio system that could function after experiencing accelerations of 20,000 times the force of gravity, well, it seemed like science fiction. Yet in a nondescript laboratory in Washington, D.C., a team of scientists was about to make the impossible possible. The Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University had been tasked with solving this seemingly unsolvable problem. Led by a brilliant physicist named Merle Tuve, the team included some of the most innovative minds in American science. They weren't military men. Many had never seen combat, never operated an anti-aircraft gun. But they understood physics, electronics, and the art of the possible. Their approach was revolutionary. Instead of trying to predict where an aircraft would be, they would create a shell that could sense where the aircraft actually was, in real time, and detonate when it came within lethal range. The proximity fuse, as it came to be known, would transform every anti-aircraft round into an intelligent hunter. But intelligence requires secrecy. And from the very beginning, the proximity fuse project operated under a veil of classification that was extraordinary even by wartime standards. The scientists working on it were forbidden from discussing their work with colleagues in adjacent laboratories. Families were told only that their loved ones were working on something important for the war effort. Even the name was classified. Internally, it was referred to only as VT, for variable time fuse, a deliberately misleading designation designed to confuse enemy intelligence. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. German intelligence services were actively trying to penetrate American research facilities. They understood, perhaps better than some Allied commanders, that wars are won not just by brave soldiers, but by superior technology. The side that could see farther, shoot more accurately, communicate more effectively, that side would ultimately prevail. Consider the implications if the proximity fuse had fallen into German hands early in its development. The Luftwaffe could have used it against Allied bomber formations. German U-boats could have employed it in their deck guns against Allied aircraft. Most terrifyingly, it could have been adapted for use in the V-1 flying bombs that terrorized London. A proximity-fused V-1 wouldn't need to hit its target directly. It could detonate above populated areas, maximizing casualties. So the secret had to be kept. But keeping secrets in wartime isn't just about classification stamps and security clearances. It's about creating entire parallel worlds of knowledge, where information flows in carefully controlled channels, where even success must be disguised, where the very people whose lives are being saved can never know how or why. The first successful tests of the proximity fuse took place in late 1941, just as America was entering the war. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Test rounds were achieving kill rates 5 to 10 times higher than conventional time-fused shells. But success brought its own challenges. How do you deploy a secret weapon without revealing its existence? How do you train gun crews to use technology they can't be told about? How do you manufacture thousands of sophisticated electronic devices without creating a paper trail that enemy agents might follow? The solutions were as ingenious as the technology itself. Manufacturing was distributed across multiple facilities, with no single location producing complete fuses. Components were given innocuous code names. Training manuals referred to improved ammunition without explaining how the improvements worked. Gun crews were simply told that their new shells were more effective. They weren't told why. Even more remarkably, the proximity fuse was designed to be self-concealing. Unlike other secret weapons that left obvious evidence of their capabilities, proximity fuses typically destroyed themselves when they exploded. Enemy forces might notice that Allied anti-aircraft fire was becoming more effective, but they couldn't easily examine the technology responsible. This self-destructing nature of the weapon created an almost perfect intelligence barrier. German scientists could theorize about what the Allies might be doing differently, but without physical evidence, they were essentially guessing. And by the time they might have developed their own proximity fuse technology, the war was already turning decisively against them. But secrets, even the best-kept ones, have a way of revealing themselves through their effects. By 1943, Luftwaffe pilots were reporting increasingly deadly anti-aircraft fire. German intelligence analysts were noting statistical anomalies in Allied defensive effectiveness. The American miracle was becoming harder to ignore, even if it remained impossible to explain. The proximity fuse was beginning to change the war in ways both large and small. Allied ships were shooting down kamikaze aircraft with unprecedented efficiency. Ground forces were using proximity-fused artillery shells to devastating effect against enemy troops in the open. The technology that had begun as a solution to the anti-aircraft problem was proving adaptable to challenges no one had originally envisioned. Yet through it all, the secret held. Tonight, as we settle in for this journey through one of World War II's most fascinating technological stories, we'll explore not just how the proximity fuse worked, but how an entire infrastructure of secrecy was built around it. We'll meet the scientists who solved seemingly impossible problems, the military leaders who recognized its potential, and the ordinary soldiers and sailors whose lives were saved by technology they never knew existed. We'll discover how a device smaller than a coffee cup helped turn the tide of the Pacific War, how it revolutionized artillery tactics in Europe, and how its very existence remained classified long after much more famous weapons became public knowledge. This is a story about more than just technology. It's about the delicate balance between innovation and security, about the human cost of keeping secrets, and about how sometimes the most important victories are the ones that must remain invisible. So settle back, let your mind drift from the complexities of today, and join me as we unlock the mystery of the silent guardian that helped win World War II. Hacked. Birth of an idea, the Naval Research Laboratory. Our story begins not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet corridors of the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. It's September 1939, and while Europe erupts into war, American scientists are wrestling with a problem that seems almost impossible. Picture this scene. Dr. Merle Tuve, a brilliant physicist from South Dakota, stands before a blackboard covered in equations. His sleeves are rolled up, chalk dust on his fingers, and his brow furrowed in concentration. Beside him, Harry Diamond, an engineer with an intuitive grasp of radio frequencies, sketches circuit diagrams that look more like abstract art than practical electronics. They're trying to solve what military strategists call the aircraft problem. German bombers are devastating British cities, and traditional anti-aircraft guns are hitting their targets less than 2% of the time. 2%. Think about that for a moment. For every 100 shells fired into the sky, 98 explode harmlessly, their timed fuses detonating too early or too late to damage fast-moving aircraft. The mathematics are brutally unforgiving. A bomber traveling at 300 miles per hour covers 440 feet every second. Artillery shells, fired from guns miles away, must be precisely timed to explode in a specific cubic volume of sky, at exactly the right moment. The slightest miscalculation in wind speed, aircraft velocity, or shell trajectory means another miss. Tuve understands this intimately. He's spent months analyzing combat reports from Britain, studying the geometry of aerial warfare. Traditional time fuses require gunners to estimate the exact moment when shell and aircraft will occupy the same space. It's like trying to thread a needle, while both the needle and thread are moving at hundreds of miles per hour, in 3 dimensions, while someone shoots at you. But Tuve and Diamond are pursuing a different approach entirely. Instead of trying to predict when a shell should explode, what if the shell could sense when it was close enough to its target? What if it could detect the presence of an aircraft and trigger itself? This is where the story becomes fascinating from an engineering perspective. The concept they're developing relies on radio waves, specifically the Doppler effect. You've experienced this phenomenon yourself, the way a train whistle changes pitch as it approaches and then passes you. Radio waves behave similarly when they bounce off moving objects. Diamond's breakthrough comes during a late evening in October 1939. He's working alone in the laboratory, surrounded by vacuum tubes and oscilloscopes, when he successfully demonstrates that a small radio transmitter can detect the reflection of its own signal from a metal target. The principle is elegant. Broadcast a radio signal, listen for echoes, and when those echoes suddenly strengthen, you're close to something metallic. But the engineering challenges are staggering. Remember, this device must fit inside an artillery shell. It will experience tremendous acceleration forces during firing, over 20,000 times the force of gravity. It must survive temperatures that would melt ordinary electronics. It must operate reliably in rain, snow, and the violent turbulence of high-altitude air currents. And perhaps most critically, it must be simple enough to manufacture by the thousands, yet sophisticated enough to distinguish between aircraft and random metal objects like church bells or water towers. Tuve assembles a small team of researchers, each bringing specialized expertise. There's Ralph Baldwin, a mathematician who tackles the signal processing problems. James Van Allen, yes, the same Van Allen who would later discover the radiation belts around Earth, works on miniaturizing the electronics. Alexander Ellett focuses on the antenna design, trying to create a radio system that can fit in a space smaller than a coffee cup. The early prototypes are, frankly, disasters. The first test units explode during firing, their delicate components shattered by the enormous forces. Others survive the launch but fail to detect targets, their radio circuits disrupted by the shell's own rotation. Still others work perfectly in laboratory conditions but become unreliable when exposed to combat temperatures. Each failure teaches them something crucial about the physics they're attempting to master. They learn that vacuum tubes, the electronic components of 1939, must be specially hardened to survive artillery forces. They discover that the shell's spinning motion actually helps stabilize the radio signal, creating a scanning effect that improves target detection. By early 1940, they achieved their first successful test. A prototype shell, fired from a gun at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, successfully detects a target drone and detonates at the optimal distance for maximum damage. The explosion occurs not when the shell hits the aircraft, but when it passes within 70 feet, close enough for shrapnel to be devastating. The implications are immediately clear to everyone present. This technology doesn't just improve anti-aircraft accuracy, it revolutionizes it. Instead of requiring direct hits, proximity fuses create lethal zones around their targets. A near miss becomes as effective as a direct hit. But even as they celebrate this breakthrough, Tuve and his team realize they've created something that must remain absolutely secret. The technology works both ways. If German scientists understand the principle, they could develop countermeasures, or worse, create their own proximity fuses for use against Allied aircraft. Let me paint you another picture, one that illustrates why this work matters so urgently. It's March 1941, and across the Atlantic, a British convoy struggles through heavy seas toward Liverpool. 43 merchant ships loaded with food, fuel, and raw materials that Britain desperately needs to survive. The convoy commander, Rear Admiral Frederick Wakewalker, stands on the bridge of his escort cruiser, scanning the horizon through binoculars. He knows that somewhere out there, German U-boats are tracking his ships. But his immediate concern is the sky, because Luftwaffe bombers have found them. The first attack comes at dawn. Heinkel He-111 bombers approach from the east, flying low to avoid radar detection. The convoy's anti-aircraft guns open fire. Streams of tracers arcing across the grey sky, black puffs of smoke marking where shells explode harmlessly around their targets. One bomber takes a direct hit and spirals into the sea. But the others press their attack, dropping bombs that bracket the merchant vessels. The SS City of Nagpur, carrying 8,000 tons of wheat, takes a hit amidships and begins to list. The crew abandons ship as she settles by the stern, her precious cargo lost to the depths. Wakewalker watches this scene with professional frustration. His gunners are brave and well-trained, but they're fighting with weapons designed for a different kind of warfare. Time-fused shells that explode at predetermined altitudes, requiring split-second timing and perfect calculations. Against fast maneuvering targets, the odds are simply overwhelming. What Wakewalker cannot know, as he watches that bomber disappear into the clouds, is that 3,000 miles away, in a laboratory in Washington, scientists are perfecting a technology that will soon transform this entire equation. A secret weapon that will turn the sky itself into a trap for enemy aircraft. The proximity fuse is about to change everything. The arsenal of democracy, mass production, begins. But first, they need to build them, millions of them. By the spring of 1942, the proximity fuse has proven itself in laboratory tests and limited field trials. The technology works. The mathematics are sound. The miniaturized radar components can survive the crushing forces of artillery fire and detect aircraft with lethal precision. Now comes perhaps the greatest challenge of all: mass production. The scale is staggering. Military planners estimate they'll need at least 5 million proximity fuses by 1944. 5 million precision instruments, each containing components more delicate than a Swiss watch, more complex than a radio, and more classified than the Manhattan Project itself. The fuse requires 17 separate manufacturing processes. Each one must be perfect. A single misaligned component, a microscopic crack in the vacuum tube, even a speck of dust in the wrong place, and the entire shell becomes just another piece of conventional ordnance, no better than what gunners have been using since 1918. The responsibility falls to an unlikely army. In factories across America, from Baltimore to Chicago, from Detroit to Los Angeles, production lines begin humming with unprecedented purpose. But these aren't the traditional munitions workers you might imagine. Walk into any proximity fuse factory in 1943 and you'll find something remarkable. The assembly lines are run almost entirely by women. They arrive each morning at 6 a.m. sharp, lunch pails in hand, hair carefully pinned back under regulation caps. Many have never worked in a factory before. They're teachers, secretaries, housewives whose husbands are fighting overseas. Some are barely 18. Others are grandmothers in their 60s. What they share is an extraordinary attention to detail. Meet Dorothy Chen, a former piano teacher from San Francisco. Her fingers, trained to find precise keys in complex musical passages, now adjust vacuum tubes with microscopic precision. The same dexterity that once coaxed Chopin from ivory keys now calibrates the radar components that will save Allied lives. Or Margaret O'Sullivan, who managed the books for her family's grocery store in Boston. Her mind for numbers and systematic thinking makes her perfect for quality control. She can spot a defective component in seconds, her trained eye catching flaws that would escape others entirely. These women don't know they're building the war's most classified weapon. Security protocols are absolute. They know only their specific task. Connecting this wire to that terminal, testing this component for proper resistance, sealing this casing to exact specifications. They call them special shells, nothing more. The secrecy extends to every level of production. Different components are manufactured in different cities by different companies. No single facility has all the pieces. Even the assembly workers see only their section of the process. In Baltimore, women wind the tiny coils that will become radar antennas. In Chicago, others craft the miniature vacuum tubes. In Detroit, precision machinists, most of them women as well, shape the aluminum casings to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The final assembly happens in the most secure facilities. Here, under armed guard and constant supervision, the proximity fuse finally comes together. Watch as Sarah Martinez, a former seamstress from New Mexico, performs the delicate final step. Her hands, steady from years of intricate needlework, guide the radar components into their protective housing. One small slip could destroy hours of work. One careless moment could compromise a weapon that might save hundreds of lives. She doesn't know that. She only knows that her work matters, that somewhere, somehow, these special shells will help bring her brother home from the Pacific. The production numbers are staggering. By late 1943, American factories are producing 100,000 proximity fuses every month. Each one requires 3,000 individual operations to complete. That's 300 million precision manufacturing steps every single month. The logistics alone would challenge any peacetime industry, but this is wartime production, and the pressure is relentless. Quality control becomes an obsession. Every fuse must be tested before shipping. But how do you test a weapon so secret that most of the testers don't know what it actually does? The answer lies in facilities like the one outside Aberdeen, Maryland. Here, in carefully controlled conditions, proximity fuses are fired at drone aircraft and radio-controlled targets. The tests happen at dawn, when fewer people are around to observe. The results are classified immediately. Test supervisor James Morrison watches through binoculars as another round of shells streak toward their targets. The explosions bloom in the sky with devastating precision. Not direct hits, but close enough to fill the air with lethal shrapnel, close enough to bring down any aircraft within a 100-foot radius. Acceptable performance, he notes in his classified report. What he doesn't write, what he's not allowed to write, is his growing amazement at what these women are accomplishing. Because that's what strikes him most: the precision, the consistency, the sheer reliability of these weapons. They're being built by people who've never seen combat, who don't fully understand what they're creating. Yet somehow they're producing instruments of war that exceed every engineering specification. The human cost of this secrecy is real. These women work long shifts, often 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They handle dangerous chemicals and work with high-voltage equipment. Industrial accidents happen, people are injured, some are killed, but they cannot be told why their sacrifice matters. They cannot know that their work is changing the fundamental nature of warfare. They cannot understand that their precision and dedication are saving countless Allied lives. They work on faith alone, faith that their contribution matters, faith that these mysterious special shells serve some greater purpose in the vast machinery of war. By early 1944, the production lines are hitting their stride. Quality rates exceed 99%. Delivery schedules are met ahead of deadline. The proximity fuse, once a laboratory curiosity, has become a mass-produced reality. The arsenal of democracy is working exactly as Franklin Roosevelt envisioned it. American industrial might, American ingenuity, and American determination are combining to create weapons that will help win the war. But the women building these weapons still don't know what they've accomplished. They won't learn the truth for years. Long after the war ends, long after victory parades and homecoming celebrations, they'll finally discover what those special shells actually were. They'll learn that their steady hands and careful attention to detail helped revolutionize warfare, that their long shifts and patient precision saved thousands of Allied lives, that their anonymous contribution to the war effort was, in fact, one of the most important manufacturing achievements in human history. For now, though, they simply continue their work. Day after day, shift after shift, building weapons they cannot understand for a war they're determined to win. The proximity fuses roll off the assembly lines by the thousands, each one a small miracle of engineering and manufacturing. Soon, they'll be loaded onto ships bound for the front lines, where their true power will finally be revealed. Guardians of the Skies, Deployment and Impact. The first proximity fuses to see combat traveled 12,000 miles from American factories to the Solomon Islands, packed in unmarked crates that bore no indication of their revolutionary contents. It was August 1943, and the Pacific Fleet had grown weary of watching Japanese aircraft slip through conventional anti-aircraft fire with maddening regularity. The Zeros and Betis seemed to dance between the exploding shells, their pilots exploiting the fundamental weakness of time-fused ammunition, the need to guess exactly where and when to detonate. Admiral William Bull Halsey had received his allocation of the new shells with typical skepticism. Another experimental weapon from the laboratory boys back home. But his gunnery officers noticed something different about these particular rounds. The paperwork carried restrictions unlike anything they'd seen before. No examination of duds, no technical analysis by ship's engineers. Any unexploded shell was to be dumped overboard immediately, in water deeper than 1,000 fathoms. The first test came during a dawn raid on Bougainville. Japanese bombers approached the fleet in their characteristic low-level attack formation, confident in their ability to penetrate the screen of destroyers. The lead gunner on USS Helena had loaded his 5-inch batteries with the mysterious new ammunition, following firing solutions that seemed almost too simple. No complex timing calculations, no desperate attempts to predict flight paths. Just aim and fire. What happened next would be reported in sanitized after-action reports that revealed nothing of the true technology involved. The attacking aircraft simply began falling from the sky with unprecedented efficiency. Shells that seemed to miss their targets by comfortable margins suddenly erupted in perfectly timed airbursts, sending shrapnel through aircraft that had thought themselves safely beyond the reach of conventional fire. The Japanese pilots had no way to understand what was happening to them. Their evasive maneuvers, perfected through 2 years of Pacific combat, proved useless against weapons that adjusted their own timing based on proximity to the target. Aircraft that should have survived began spiraling into the ocean, their pilots never knowing they had encountered technology that wouldn't be fully understood for decades. Word of the new weapon's effectiveness spread through carefully controlled channels. Fleet commanders began requesting allocations of the special ammunition, though they remained ignorant of how it actually worked. The proximity fuse had entered combat under a cloak of secrecy so complete that even the men firing it couldn't explain its success. But the Pacific theater was merely the proving ground. The technology's most crucial test would come 6,000 miles away, in the skies above southern England, against a threat that represented Hitler's last hope for victory through terror. The first V-1 flying bomb crossed the English Channel at dawn on June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after D-Day. Its pulse-jet engine produced a distinctive puttering sound that would soon become the most feared noise in London, until it stopped. The silence meant the bomb was falling, carrying its 1,170-pound warhead toward whatever lay below. Winston Churchill had been briefed on Hitler's Vergeltungswaffen, revenge weapons. But the reality proved more psychologically devastating than intelligence reports had suggested. These weren't aircraft with human pilots who might show mercy or make tactical errors. They were flying robots, immune to fear, programmed for a single purpose: the destruction of British civilian morale. Traditional fighter aircraft struggled against the V-1s. The flying bombs traveled at 400 miles per hour, just fast enough to outrun many interceptors, and their simple construction made them remarkably difficult to shoot down. Cannon shells passed through their thin metal skin without causing sufficient damage to stop the warhead from reaching its target. Anti-aircraft guns faced an even greater challenge. The V-1s flew at altitudes and speeds that made conventional time-fused shells nearly useless. Gunners found themselves trying to hit small, fast-moving targets with ammunition designed for large, slow-moving bombers. The mathematics of interception became a nightmare of trigonometry and guesswork. Then, the proximity fuses arrived in Britain, shipped across the Atlantic under the same extraordinary security measures that had protected them in the Pacific. British gunnery officers received the American ammunition with detailed firing instructions and absolute prohibitions against technical examination. They were told simply that these shells would prove more effective against the German robot bombs, without any explanation of why. The first V-1 to encounter proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire was intercepted over the Kent countryside on a grey morning in July 1944. The flying bomb maintained its steady course toward London, its pulse jet engine puttering with mechanical indifference to the flak bursts appearing around it. Then a 5-inch shell passed within 30 feet of the robot's starboard wing. The proximity fuse detected the target and triggered its warhead with perfect timing. The explosion caught the V-1 in a sphere of high-velocity shrapnel that shredded its control surfaces and severed its fuel lines. Instead of continuing toward the capital, the flying bomb tumbled earthward into an empty field, its warhead detonating harmlessly among the hedgerows. British gunners watched in amazement as their effectiveness against the flying bombs improved dramatically. Targets that had previously required dozens of shells to bring down now fell to concentrated barrages that seemed to explode with uncanny precision. The V-1s continued to cross the Channel in waves of 10 and 20, but fewer and fewer reached their intended targets in London. German intelligence officers noted the sudden improvement in British anti-aircraft performance with growing alarm. Their flying bombs were being intercepted at rates that seemed to defy the known capabilities of time-fused ammunition. Technical analysis of crash sites revealed nothing. The proximity fuses had been designed to destroy themselves completely upon detonation, leaving no trace of their revolutionary technology. Hitler's revenge weapons, which had promised to break British morale and perhaps force a negotiated peace, instead became an increasingly expensive demonstration of American technological superiority. The Führer demanded explanations from his scientific advisors, who could only speculate about improved radar-directed firing or new types of conventional ammunition. Meanwhile, in the factories across America, the women who had built these war-winning weapons continued their shifts in complete ignorance of their contribution to the defense of London. They assembled components and tested circuits, following procedures they didn't understand to create weapons whose impact they would never fully know. The proximity fuse had proven itself in 2 theaters against 2 entirely different types of targets. Japanese aircraft and German robots fell from the sky with equal efficiency, victims of technology that remained invisible even as it changed the fundamental mathematics of aerial warfare. As autumn approached in 1944, the skies above both London and the Pacific had grown noticeably quieter. The V-1 campaign sputtered to an end as launching sites fell to advancing Allied armies, while Japanese air power continued its steady decline in the face of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire that made every approach to American fleets a potential death sentence. The secret weapon had fulfilled its promise, protecting both military forces and civilian populations with unprecedented effectiveness. Yet its very success ensured that its story would remain hidden, buried beneath layers of classification that would outlast the war itself. In the gathering darkness of another wartime evening, the Guardians of the Sky continued their silent vigil, their true nature known only to a handful of scientists and officials who understood the magnitude of what had been accomplished through ingenuity, manufacturing precision, and absolute secrecy. The secret revealed: declassification and legacy. The first hints of dawn on August 15, 1945, brought more than just the end of the Second World War. In laboratories and government offices across America, officials began the delicate process of deciding which secrets could finally see daylight and which must remain buried forever. The proximity fuse would not stay hidden. Within weeks of Japan's surrender, carefully worded press releases began appearing in technical journals and newspapers. The language was measured, diplomatic, almost apologetic. A new type of anti-aircraft shell, one report called it, utilizing radio principles to improve accuracy against aerial targets. Such modest words for a weapon that had fundamentally altered the mathematics of warfare. Dr. Merle Tuver found himself in the unfamiliar position of giving interviews, trying to explain 5 years of revolutionary work to reporters who struggled to grasp the implications. How do you describe the moment when warfare became electronic? When human reflexes gave way to the speed of radio waves? We simply taught the shell to recognize when it was close enough, he would say, his scientists' precision making the miraculous sound routine. But the women who had assembled those shells in darkened factories, they finally understood what their careful hands had created. Thousands of them learned, sometimes decades later, that their wartime sacrifice had been building the future itself, one tiny component at a time. The declassification revealed numbers that staggered even military analysts. Over 22 million proximity fuses had been manufactured during the war. 22 million miniature radar sets, each no larger than a coffee cup, each containing technology that would have seemed like science fiction just years before. The cost had been enormous, nearly $2 billion in 1940s currency, more than the Manhattan Project in its early phases. Yet unlike the atomic bomb, this weapon had been used extensively, repeatedly, successfully, and somehow remained completely secret. Military historians began reassessing entire campaigns through this new lens. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, where Japanese aircraft fell in unprecedented numbers. The defense of London against V-1 rockets, where hit rates had mysteriously improved from 17% to 79% almost overnight. The liberation of Antwerp, where German V-1 attacks had suddenly become far less effective. All these victories, attributed to improved training or tactical innovations, had actually hinged on a secret that weighed less than 4 pounds. But revelation brought uncomfortable questions. Ethicists and military philosophers found themselves grappling with implications that extended far beyond any single weapon. The proximity fuse represented something new in warfare. The marriage of advanced technology with mass destruction. It was precise yet indiscriminate, sophisticated yet deployed by the millions. Dr. Vannevar Bush, who had overseen much of America's wartime scientific effort, wrote privately about the moral weight of such innovations. "We have crossed a threshold," he noted in his personal journal. "We have made war itself a matter of technological superiority rather than human courage alone." The fuse had saved countless Allied lives, but it had also made killing more efficient, more automated, more removed from human decision-making. Each shell now carried its own electronic brain, making life and death calculations at the speed of light. Some of the scientists who had created it struggled with this legacy. They had solved an impossible mathematical problem, created a manufacturing miracle, maintained perfect operational security, but they had also accelerated warfare's transformation into something cold and algorithmic. Yet the proximity fuse's most profound impact was still to come. The technology that had been miniaturized into artillery shells began finding new applications in peacetime. The radar principles, the electronic switching circuits, the mass production techniques for precision components, all of it flowed into civilian research and development. Early computers borrowed switching concepts first perfected in proximity fuse factories. Radar systems for commercial aviation used principles refined under wartime pressure. The entire electronics industry found itself built on foundations laid in secret during those desperate war years. Universities that had been involved in the project, Johns Hopkins, MIT, Harvard, discovered that their graduate programs had been fundamentally altered by the experience. Students who had worked on classified components during the war brought new approaches to engineering problems. Professors who had spent years thinking about miniaturization and reliability under extreme conditions found peacetime applications everywhere. The National Bureau of Standards, which had developed many of the precision measurement techniques required for fuse production, became a center for post-war technological innovation. Their wartime expertise in quality control and component testing helped establish America's leadership in consumer electronics. Even the women who had assembled the fuses found their skills in demand. The precision hand-eye coordination required for fuse assembly translated perfectly to early computer manufacturing, television production, and precision instrument making. Many became supervisors and quality control specialists in the emerging electronics industry. But perhaps the most significant legacy was invisible, a change in how America approached technological challenges. The Proximity Fuse project had proven that impossible problems could be solved through coordinated effort between universities, government laboratories, and private industry. It had demonstrated that theoretical research could be rapidly translated into mass production. Most importantly, it had shown that technological superiority could be achieved through systematic organization rather than individual genius alone. This model, the marriage of academic research, government funding, and industrial production, became the template for America's Cold War technological efforts. The space program, computer development, advanced materials research, all followed patterns established during those frantic wartime years when scientists raced to create shells that could think. Military strategists recognized an even more profound shift. The proximity fuse had made defense temporarily superior to offense, at least in the realm of aerial warfare. For the first time in military history, attacking aircraft faced defensive systems that reacted faster than human reflexes allowed. This defensive advantage would prove temporary. Attack methods evolved, countermeasures were developed, new weapons emerged. But for a brief moment, the proximity fuse had tilted the fundamental balance of warfare itself. In the quiet years after 1945, as the world adjusted to peace, some of the original research team would gather occasionally at scientific conferences. They had shared something unique, the experience of creating a secret that changed history while remaining completely hidden. Dr. Harry Diamond, whose early work on radio circuits had made the entire project possible, often reflected on the strange nature of their achievement. They had built the most widely used advanced weapon of the war, yet most people would never hear of it. They had solved problems that had seemed impossible, yet their success was measured in destruction rather than creation. The proximity fuse represented both the promise and the burden of modern warfare, the application of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements to humanity's most primitive impulses. As the evening settles around these memories, we can appreciate the complexity of their legacy. Brilliant minds working in desperate times, creating solutions that saved lives while taking others, building the technological foundation for both peace and future conflicts. Their secret, finally revealed, reminds us that history's most important innovations often remain invisible, until someone decides the world is ready to understand what has been accomplished in the shadows. Our echoes of ingenuity, the enduring impact. Tonight, as we settle into the quieter hours, we can imagine those same laboratories and factories as they exist now. Empty workbenches where brilliant minds once gathered, silent assembly lines where dedicated hands once built the impossible. The Naval Research Laboratory still stands in Washington, its corridors echoing with decades of innovation. Walk through those halls today, and you might sense the ghost of Merle Tuve's urgency, the phantom of Harry Diamond's meticulous attention to detail. The rooms where they first conceived radio waves bouncing between tiny antennas now house different projects, different secrets, different hopes for the future. But something lingers in those spaces, the residual energy of minds pushed to their absolute limits, of people who refused to accept that a problem was unsolvable simply because no one had solved it before. Consider the profound collaboration this achievement required, not just between scientists and engineers, but across an entire society. From the highest levels of government to factory floors in small American towns, thousands of people contributed to something they couldn't fully understand. The executives who approved massive budgets for an unproven concept. The security officers who maintained absolute secrecy while allowing just enough information flow to keep the work moving. The test pilots who flew into live fire zones to prove these tiny radios could function in combat. Each played their part in a symphony of innovation they couldn't hear in its entirety. The women at the Eastman Kodak facility in Rochester, their careful hands assembling components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. They went home each evening knowing they'd contributed to the war effort, but never knowing they'd helped create one of history's most decisive weapons. Margaret Chen, working the night shift, her fingers dancing across delicate vacuum tubes. Sarah Morrison, checking quality control on thousands of tiny antennas. Dorothy Williams, carefully packing finished fuses into unmarked crates. Their names don't appear in the official histories, but their dedication lives on in every life saved by their precision work. Think of the mathematicians who translated abstract theories into practical solutions. The metallurgists who developed new alloys that could withstand the incredible forces of artillery firing. The radio engineers who miniaturized complex circuits into packages smaller than a light bulb. Each breakthrough built upon previous discoveries, creating a chain of innovation that stretched back decades and forward into our digital age. The proximity fuse represented something uniquely American. Not just technological prowess, but the ability to coordinate massive efforts across multiple institutions, multiple disciplines, multiple communities. It showed what could be accomplished when brilliant individuals worked within systems designed to amplify their capabilities rather than constrain them. Universities partnered with private industry. Government laboratories shared resources with corporate research divisions. Military requirements drove civilian innovations that would transform post-war life. This wasn't just about building a better weapon. It was about proving that democracy could mobilize intellectual resources as effectively as any authoritarian system. Picture those shipping crates, unmarked and unremarkable, traveling by rail across the American continent. Each one containing hundreds of tiny devices that would change the course of battles thousands of miles away. The railroad workers who loaded them had no idea they were handling the most classified cargo in American history. The ship captains who carried them across dangerous waters knew only that these particular crates required extra security. Yet somehow, through this vast network of partial knowledge and complete trust, the right components reached the right places at precisely the right moments. The fuses that defended London arrived just as the V1 attacks intensified. The naval versions reached Pacific fleets exactly when Japanese kamikaze tactics demanded new defensive capabilities. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was the result of logistical planning that bordered on the miraculous. Consider the moral weight carried by those who knew the full scope of what they were creating. Merle Tuver, understanding that his radio innovations would kill thousands of enemy airmen. The military commanders who deployed these weapons, knowing their enemies had no defense against them. They carried the burden of effectiveness, the knowledge that their success would be measured in lives taken as well as lives saved. In the decades since the war ended, we've learned to appreciate the full magnitude of what they accomplished. Not just the technical achievement, but the human achievement. The ability to maintain absolute secrecy while fostering the open collaboration that innovation requires. The Proximity Fuse project created templates for post-war research efforts. The same organizational structures that coordinated radar development would later guide space exploration. The security protocols developed for protecting fuse technology would evolve into systems for safeguarding nuclear secrets. Even the manufacturing techniques pioneered for mass-producing these delicate devices would influence everything from television production to computer manufacturing. The women who learned precision assembly skills building fuse components would carry those capabilities into peacetime industries. The engineers who mastered miniaturization techniques would apply them to consumer electronics. The project managers who coordinated these complex efforts would lead post-war corporations. Their wartime education in advanced technology seeded America's post-war economic boom. Tonight we can honor not just the famous names, Tuver and Diamond, Bush and Tolman, but also the anonymous contributors whose names we'll never know. The janitor who cleaned the laboratories each night, maintaining security protocols he didn't fully understand. The cafeteria workers who fed the research teams through countless long days. The security guards who protected secrets they weren't allowed to learn. Each played an essential role in maintaining the environment where breakthrough innovation could flourish. The truck drivers who delivered raw materials to classified facilities, the accountants who tracked expenses for projects they couldn't discuss, the secretaries who typed reports they weren't permitted to read. Their quiet professionalism created the foundation upon which more visible achievements were built. As we reflect on this remarkable story, we might consider what it reveals about human potential. When faced with seemingly impossible challenges, people don't just rise to meet them. They often exceed what anyone thought possible. The proximity fuse wasn't just a weapon. It was proof that complex problems could yield to sustained intellectual effort, that collaboration could amplify individual brilliance, that secrecy and innovation, seemingly contradictory, could work in harmony when the stakes were high enough. These lessons extended far beyond military applications. They showed that American society could mobilize its intellectual resources as effectively as its industrial capacity, that universities and corporations could partner productively, that government investment in basic research could yield practical dividends. The proximity fuse helped establish the template for what would become known as big science. Large-scale, coordinated research efforts that tackled problems too complex for individual investigators or single institutions. Picture those empty factories now. Sunlight streaming through windows where women once worked by artificial light. Dust settling on floors where precision instruments once measured tolerances smaller than human hair. But the legacy lives on in the GPS satellites that guide our daily travels, in the radar systems that make air travel safe, in the computer networks that connect our global economy. The same principles that made the proximity fuse possible: miniaturization and systems integration, quality control, coordinated manufacturing. These became the foundation of our modern technological civilization. Every smartphone contains descendants of the circuits first miniaturized for artillery shells. Every wireless network employs principles first proven in those tiny radio transmitters. The ingenuity that solved the aircraft problem continues solving problems we haven't even recognized yet. As this evening draws toward its close, we can rest in the knowledge that human creativity, properly supported and carefully coordinated, remains capable of remarkable achievements. The same collaborative spirit that created the proximity fuse continues in research laboratories around the world. Scientists and engineers working together on challenges that seem impossible today but may yield to tomorrow's breakthrough. Perhaps somewhere tonight, in a quiet laboratory or workshop, someone is having the same kind of insight that came to Merle Tuver in 1940. The sudden realization that a seemingly intractable problem might have an elegant solution. The proximity fuse reminds us that innovation often happens in darkness, that the most important work is frequently invisible, that the people changing the world might not even realize the magnitude of what they're accomplishing. Their dedication, their precision, their willingness to work toward goals they couldn't fully envision, these qualities persist, ready to tackle whatever challenges await. In the quiet dedication of researchers working late into the night, in the careful attention of manufacturers building components they don't completely understand, in the trust of citizens supporting projects whose full purpose remains classified, the spirit that made the proximity fuse possible lives on, patient, persistent, and quietly confident that human ingenuity, properly applied, can solve any problem, protect any value, achieve any goal worth pursuing. And in that knowledge, we can find the peace that comes from understanding our place in a long chain of human achievement, contributors to solutions we may never see completed, beneficiaries of innovations we never fully appreciate, part of the ongoing story of minds working together to build a better world. Image gallery. As we drift deeper into this story of hidden innovation, let us pause to truly see the world this technology inhabited. Picture, if you will, the cluttered workshop where Merle Tuver first sketched the impossible. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, blackboards covered in equations that would reshape warfare, the smell of hot vacuum tubes and soldering iron, prototype shells lined up on wooden benches like metal puzzle boxes, each one containing circuits more complex than most radios of the era. In one corner, a disassembled German shell, captured, studied, reverse-engineered, its simple contact fuse looking almost primitive beside the American proximity devices. The enemy never quite grasped what they were facing. never understood why their aircraft suddenly found the sky so much more dangerous. Now shift your focus to the factory floor at Eastman Kodak. Rows upon rows of women in white coats, their hands moving with practiced precision, assembling components they weren't allowed to understand. Each worker knew only her small piece of the puzzle. The woman installing the battery never met the one calibrating the antenna. The supervisor checking quality never explained what quality meant. Security was everywhere, invisible but absolute. Guards who looked like factory workers. Inspectors who asked no questions about the devices they approved. Shipping clerks who sent crates marked only with code numbers to destinations they couldn't pronounce. Imagine the testing grounds in the New Mexico desert. Engineers in khaki uniforms squinting against the sun, watching shells explode in empty sky, measuring blast patterns, calculating kill probabilities. The mathematics of destruction made precise and predictable. No longer hoping a shell might hit its target, now engineering the moment of perfect proximity. Picture the first convoy to receive proximity-fused ammunition, sailors loading shells they'd never seen before, gun crews receiving new firing instructions, aim close, not direct, a concept that challenged everything they'd learned about artillery. The psychological shift from hoping for a direct hit to trusting in invisible technology. Now see the Pacific Theater. Aircraft carriers steaming toward Japanese-held islands, their anti-aircraft guns loaded with secret weapons. Pilots in ready rooms, unaware that the ships below them carried shells that could think, that could sense their approach and choose the perfect moment to detonate. The view from above tells another story. Formations of Japanese aircraft approaching what they assumed were conventionally defended ships, flying into killing fields that shouldn't have existed, encountering accuracy rates that defied their intelligence reports, their tactical manuals suddenly obsolete. Shift now to London during the V1 campaign, gun emplacements along the Thames estuary, crews who had struggled for years against high-speed targets suddenly achieving kill rates that amazed their commanders. The flying bombs that had terrorized the city becoming manageable threats. Technology turning the tide in a battle most civilians never knew was being fought. In the war rooms beneath London, charts showing interception percentages climbing week by week. Churchill's advisors quietly amazed by numbers that exceeded their most optimistic projections. The proximity fuse proving itself in the most crucial test, defending the homeland against Hitler's revenge weapons. Picture the German engineers studying fragments of American shells, puzzling over components that made no sense, circuits too complex for the simple task of explosion. Their reports filed away, marked with questions no one could answer. The Reich's scientists never quite bridging the gap between observation and understanding. Now envision the post-war revelation, newspaper headlines announcing the secret weapon, factory workers finally learning what they had built, veterans understanding why their ships had survived battles that should have been disasters. The proximity fuse emerging from shadow into history. See the corporate boardrooms where peacetime applications were planned. The same technology that had saved London now guiding civilian aircraft. Military precision becoming commercial innovation. The classified becoming commonplace. Picture the universities where former fuse engineers became professors, teaching students who had no idea their instructor had helped win a world war. Knowledge flowing from military necessity into academic exploration. The tools of war becoming instruments of understanding. Finally, imagine the archives where this story rests today. Filing cabinets full of declassified reports, technical drawings that once carried security classifications higher than the Manhattan Project. The complete picture finally visible to historians, to engineers, to anyone curious enough to look. These images form a mosaic of innovation under pressure, of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things, of technology serving purposes its creators never imagined. Each photograph, each document, each memory, a piece of the larger story of human ingenuity applied to humanity's greatest challenges. And in these images, we find not just history, but inspiration, proof that complex problems yield to persistent effort, that collaboration multiplies individual capability, that the impossible becomes inevitable when minds work together toward a common goal. Han, Image Gallery. The seventh photograph draws us into a different kind of laboratory, not the cramped workshop of early experimentation, but a spacious testing facility in 1943. White-coated technicians move with practiced precision around equipment that has evolved far beyond those first crude prototypes. The oscilloscope screens glow with steady traces. The radio frequency generators hum with contained power. Here we see the proximity fuse in its mature form. Sleek metal cylinders no larger than a coffee cup, yet containing circuits more sophisticated than most radios of the era. Each unit represents thousands of hours of refinement, countless iterations of design, the accumulated wisdom of America's finest electrical engineers compressed into a device that could fit in your palm. Notice the careful documentation, every test recorded, every modification catalogued. This was science at its most methodical, where intuition gave way to systematic investigation, where hunches became hypotheses, where hypotheses became proven principles. The clipboard in the technician's hand contains data that would reshape naval warfare, though he works with the quiet concentration of a clockmaker. The eighth image transports us to a very different scene, the deck of a destroyer in the Pacific, 1944. The 5-inch gun mount dominates the frame, its barrel elevated toward a sky that holds unseen threats. But look closely at the ammunition handlers, young sailors, many barely out of their teens, loading shells that represent the culmination of 5 years of secret development. They handle each round with practiced efficiency, unaware they're witnessing a revolution in warfare. The shells look identical to conventional ammunition, the same weight, the same size, the same careful loading procedures, yet inside each one lies technology that would have seemed like magic just a decade earlier. Radio circuits that can think, that can decide, that can act in the milliseconds between life and death. The photographer captured something profound here, the moment where laboratory theory meets battlefield reality, where the abstract mathematics of radar reflection becomes the very real protection of young men far from home. Our ninth photograph reveals the human cost of secrecy, a family portrait from 1945. A woman in her 30s stands with 2 young children, her husband's chair notably empty. He's somewhere in the Pacific, serving on a ship protected by weapons his wife helped create. Though she cannot know this, cannot speak of her work, cannot share the pride she might feel in contributing to his safety. Her factory identification badge is visible on the kitchen table, a small reminder of the double life she leads. By day, she assembles components for a purpose she's told serves the war effort. By evening, she tends to children who ask when Daddy will come home. The Proximity Fuse project succeeded not just because of brilliant scientists, but because of thousands of such families, ordinary people carrying extraordinary secrets. The 10th image shows us the moment secrecy began to lift. A newspaper from August 1945. The headline speaks of victory. But buried on page 3, a small article mentions new anti-aircraft ammunition for the first time. The reporter clearly doesn't understand what he's describing, refers to improved shells and better accuracy, missing entirely the revolutionary nature of what he's documenting. Even in Revelation, the proximity fuse remained partially hidden, its true sophistication obscured by wartime censorship habits, by the natural tendency to understate rather than reveal. This photograph captures the strange twilight between secret and public, between wartime necessity and peacetime openness. Image 11 brings us full circle, a 1950s electronics laboratory, where former proximity fuse engineers now work on civilian projects. Television circuits, radio improvements, early computer components. The same hands that once crafted weapons of war now build tools of peace and progress. The workbenches look familiar, the same careful attention to detail, the same methodical approach to complex problems, but the urgency has transformed into patience, the secrecy into openness, the military precision into civilian innovation. Here we see how wartime breakthroughs flow into peacetime prosperity, how emergency measures become everyday miracles. Our final photograph, image 12, taken at a 1960s university, shows an elderly Merle Tuver addressing a classroom of engineering students. The blackboard behind him is covered with equations, the same mathematical principles that made the proximity fuse possible. now being passed to a new generation. His students listen intently, unaware they're learning from one of the architects of modern warfare. The knowledge he shares will flow into countless applications: satellite communications, medical devices, navigation systems, the proximity Fuze's legacy spreading like ripples across the pond of human knowledge. In his eyes, we see satisfaction, the quiet pride of someone who helped solve an impossible problem, who kept faith with secrecy when secrecy mattered, who shared knowledge when sharing became possible. The photograph captures not just a teacher and his students, but the eternal process by which one generation passes its hard-won wisdom to the next. Image gallery. The camera pulls back, revealing the wider laboratory. Other workbenches scattered with components, oscilloscopes humming quietly. The soft amber glow of vacuum tubes, the gentle tick of precision instruments. This is where breakthrough happens, not in dramatic moments of inspiration, but in patient accumulation of small victories. We move through archives now, rows upon rows of technical drawings, engineering specifications covered in careful annotations, margin notes in different handwritings, corrections, improvements, refinements. Each sheet tells part of the story. The evolution from impossible dream to manufactured reality. The paper itself has aged to warm cream. The ink faded to sepia, but the precision of the technical language remained sharp. Here, a cutaway diagram of the fuse mechanism, every component labeled with military precision, the radio transmitter no larger than a matchbox, the receiver circuits etched onto ceramic wafers, the safety mechanisms that prevented premature detonation. Looking at these drawings, you can almost hear the conversations, engineers debating tolerances, arguing over materials, solving problems that had never been solved before. A factory photograph from 1943. Women in white coats working under bright fluorescent lights, their hands steady and sure as they assemble components smaller than postage stamps. In the background, quality control stations where each fuse undergoes rigorous testing. The image captures industrial precision at its finest. Human skill amplified by careful organization. The women's faces show concentration, pride in craftsmanship. Though they couldn't know their work would help turn the tide of war, the camera finds a shipping manifest, stamped top secret, lists of serial numbers, destination codes, quantities that boggle the mind. By war's end, over 22 million proximity fuses produced, each one a small miracle of miniaturization, each one carrying the accumulated knowledge of thousands of engineers, mathematicians, factory workers, the bureaucracy of innovation, as crucial as the inspiration itself. Now we see a combat photograph, taken from the deck of a destroyer in the Pacific, anti-aircraft guns elevated against a tropical sky. In the distance, barely visible, the white puffs of proximity fuse explosions. The image captures a moment of transition, the old warfare of direct hits giving way to something more sophisticated, more deadly. The gunners don't know they're using revolutionary technology. To them, it's simply ammunition that works better than anything they've used before. A London rooftop, 1944. Anti-aircraft batteries positioned between chimney stacks. The city stretches to the horizon, church spires and government buildings, ordinary houses where ordinary families sleep, trusting in defenses they cannot see or understand. The proximity fuse's greatest victory, not just shooting down V1 flying bombs, but allowing people to sleep peacefully, to trust that invisible guardians watch over them. Here, a photograph from the war crimes trials. German officers reviewing captured proximity fuses, their technical experts examining the mechanisms with professional curiosity. Even in defeat, recognizing brilliance when they see it. One officer holds a fuse up to the light, studying the miniaturized components, perhaps wondering how the Americans achieved such precision, how they manufactured such complexity in such quantities. The photograph captures a moment of grudging respect, engineer to engineer, transcending the boundaries of conflict. A congressional hearing room, 1945, scientists testifying about their wartime work, finally able to speak openly about achievements long held in secret. Charts and graphs displayed on easels, proximity fuse effectiveness rates, ammunition savings, lives preserved. The formal setting cannot quite contain their evident pride. Years of anonymous contribution finally receiving public recognition. Democracy learning about the tools that helped preserve it. The archives reveal peacetime applications, proximity sensors in automotive safety systems, medical devices that detect tissue density, navigation equipment for commercial aircraft. The same principles that once brought down enemy planes, now helping civilian aircraft land safely in fog. The transformation from weapon to tool, from military secret to civilian benefit. Innovation finding its way home. A university laboratory, 1960s. Students working with electronic components that would have been impossible without proximity fuse innovations. Miniaturized circuits, precision manufacturing techniques, quality control standards, the knowledge flowing forward, enriching new generations of engineers. The photograph shows continuity, the unbroken chain of learning that connects wartime necessity to peacetime progress. Finally, a museum display case, proximity fuses arranged alongside explanatory text, visitors reading about this once secret technology, children pressing close to the glass, trying to understand how something so small could have mattered so much. The fuses themselves seem almost humble, simple metal cylinders that once held such sophisticated secrets. Now they rest in honored retirement, their stories finally told, their contributions finally acknowledged. The light in the museum is soft, respectful. These artifacts have earned their place in history, not through drama or spectacle, but through quiet effectiveness, through the accumulated wisdom of collaborative innovation, through the patient work of solving impossible problems, one small breakthrough at a time. Image Gallery. The museum's final gallery holds the most precious artifacts. The personal items, the handwritten notes, the photographs that capture not just technology, but humanity. Here, in a climate-controlled case, lies Merle Tuva's original notebook. The pages yellowed with age, but the equations still sharp, still revolutionary. His handwriting reveals the moment of breakthrough, the instant when theory became possibility. You can see where his pen paused, where he worked through the mathematics that would change warfare forever. Beside it, Harry Diamond's prototype sketches, technical drawings that look almost artistic now, clean lines showing the elegant simplicity of the final design, the beauty of engineering distilled to its essence. These weren't just blueprints, they were maps to the future. The next case holds something more intimate, a collection of photographs from Section T, black and white images of the team at work. Serious faces bent over workbenches, hands adjusting delicate components, the intensity visible even across decades. These were people who knew they were racing against time, racing against death itself. One photograph stands out. The entire team gathered for what must have been a rare celebration. Their faces relaxed, almost surprised by their own success. Merle Tuve in the center, his usual intensity softened by something like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe they had actually solved the impossible problem. The women workers have their own display, faces we never learned to name, but whose precision made everything possible. Their photographs show concentration, dedication, the quiet pride of craftspeople who knew their work mattered, even if they couldn't know exactly how. Their legacy lives in every fuse that functioned perfectly, every life their accuracy saved. Moving deeper into the gallery, we find the international perspective. Photographs of German engineers examining captured American shells, their faces showing puzzlement, frustration. They knew something revolutionary had happened, but the secret held, the proximity fuse remained mysterious even in enemy hands. Japanese technical reports, translated now, reveal their growing concern about American anti-aircraft effectiveness, charts showing their aircraft losses climbing steadily. Statistics that represent thousands of young pilots who never understood what new technology was hunting them. The cold mathematics of technological advantage. But here too, evidence of adaptation, of resilience. Enemy engineers working frantically to understand, to counter, to innovate in return. The eternal cycle of military technology. Each breakthrough spawning new challenges, new solutions. The Pacific Theater has its own visual story. Photographs of ships bristling with new anti-aircraft guns, crews loading the revolutionary shells, the fuses looking deceptively simple, almost innocent, small cylinders that contained such sophisticated electronics, such careful engineering. Action photographs show the results. Kamikaze aircraft caught in mid-flight by proximity explosions. The deadly effectiveness captured in stark black and white. These images remind us that innovation, however elegant, serves harsh purposes, lives saved on one side, lives lost on the other. Yet even these combat photographs carry a certain dignity. They document not just destruction, but protection. The proximity fuse defending rather than attacking, creating shields of precisely timed explosions, technology serving as guardian rather than aggressor. The post-war gallery tells a gentler story. Scientists returning to universities, engineers joining private companies, the great collaboration dispersing, but carrying its lessons forward. Photographs of reunions, decades later, aged faces still lit by the memory of shared achievement. Corporate laboratories that grew from wartime innovation. Bell Labs expanding, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory continuing. The institutional legacy of collaborative research. Modern facilities that still echo with the urgency of those wartime years. Students learning from the proximity fuse pioneers. Knowledge passing to new generations. The techniques, the approaches, the collaborative spirit that made breakthrough possible. Education carrying forward what secrecy once protected. The final display case holds perhaps the most moving artifacts. Letters from families, finally learning what their loved ones had worked on. Spouses discovering why those wartime years had been shrouded in such mystery. Children understanding at last why their parents had seemed to carry such weighty secrets. Thank you notes from veterans, sent to the laboratories after declassification. Grateful words from men who had served on ships, who had lived through air attacks, who finally understood what technology had protected them. Personal testimonies to the human impact of innovation. And patents, finally filed, finally public. Technical documents that had been classified for years, now available to inspire new generations of engineers. The knowledge freed, ready to serve peaceful purposes, ready to spark new breakthroughs in civilian technology. The gallery ends quietly, respectfully. These images and artifacts tell a complete story. From desperate wartime need, through brilliant innovation, to lasting legacy. They remind us that history lives not just in grand narratives, but in personal dedication, in collaborative effort, in the patient work of solving humanity's greatest challenges. Image gallery. The final images in our gallery draw us deeper into contemplation. Each photograph and document a window into moments that shaped our world. Here, in Image 7, we see a group photograph taken in 1947. Scientists and engineers gathered for the first public symposium on proximity fuse technology. Their faces show a mixture of pride and relief, finally able to discuss their work openly, finally able to claim credit for innovations that had remained anonymous for years. Notice the relaxed postures, the genuine smiles. These are people unburdening themselves of secrets, sharing knowledge that had been locked away in classified files. The symposium proceedings, thick volumes of technical papers, sit stacked on the table before them, ready to enter university libraries, ready to inspire a new generation of researchers. Image 8 captures something more intimate. A letter written in 1948 by a veteran to Merle Tuve. The handwriting careful and grateful. Dear Dr. Tuve, I learned from a magazine article that your team developed the shells that saved our destroyer in the Pacific. The paper shows its age now, but the gratitude remains fresh. These personal connections, these individual thank you notes, they represent thousands more that were never written, never sent. The veteran describes a night attack by Japanese aircraft, how the new shells seemed to explode at exactly the right moment, how his ship survived when others didn't. He had no way of knowing then about the miniature radar sets, the precise timing circuits, the months of testing that made those perfect explosions possible. He only knew that something had worked. Something had protected him and his shipmates. Moving to image 9, we find ourselves looking at a technical drawing from 1949, one of the first proximity fuse schematics released to civilian industry. The classified stamps have been carefully removed, replaced with approved for public release. This particular design would influence radio technology, early television circuits, eventually contributing to the development of transistors. The drawing shows elegant simplicity, clean lines representing complex engineering, each component carefully labeled now for public understanding. What had once been known only to a few dozen engineers, now available to anyone with technical curiosity. The democratization of innovation, the way military breakthroughs eventually serve peaceful progress. Image 10 presents a factory floor from the 1950s. The same Sylvania plant that once produced proximity fuses, now manufacturing television tubes, many of the same workers, the same precision manufacturing techniques, but serving entirely different purposes. The assembly line workers, mostly women, demonstrate skills learned during wartime, adapted now for peacetime prosperity. You can see the continuity, the way wartime innovation flows naturally into civilian applications. The same steady hands that once assembled radar circuits for artillery shells, now creating the components that would bring entertainment and information into American homes. The same attention to detail, the same commitment to quality, serving life rather than war. Image 11 shows us a classroom scene from 1952. Professor Harry Diamond, teaching at George Washington University. On the blackboard behind him, equations that describe radio wave propagation, proximity detection principles. His students, young engineers eager to build the post-war world, learning from someone who helped create one of the war's most crucial technologies. Diamond's expression shows the satisfaction of a teacher, someone passing hard-won knowledge to the next generation, no longer bound by secrecy classifications, free to explore the full implications of proximity sensing, free to encourage students to push these concepts even further. The classroom represents hope, the way knowledge multiplies when shared openly. Our final image. Number 12 brings us full circle, a museum display case from the 1960s containing an actual proximity fuse, finally declassified, finally visible to the public. The small metal cylinder sits under glass, unremarkable in appearance, yet representing one of the most significant technological breakthroughs of the 20th century. The museum placard tells the basic story, but visitors can now see for themselves the physical reality of innovation. The fuse looks almost simple, which speaks to the genius of its designers. Complex technology made to appear straightforward. Revolutionary capability housed in conventional packaging. Children press their faces to the glass, trying to understand how something so small could have changed history. Their curiosity represents the future, the way each generation builds upon the discoveries of those who came before. The proximity fuse, once the most guarded secret of World War II, now inspiring young minds to pursue their own innovations. These 12 images together tell a complete story, from desperate wartime need through brilliant innovation to lasting peacetime legacy. They remind us that technology serves humanity best when knowledge flows freely, when secrets eventually become shared wisdom, when military necessity transforms into civilian progress. The gallery grows quiet now, respectful of the journey we've witnessed. The proximity fuse story continues in laboratories and classrooms around the world, in every device that uses radar, in every innovation that builds upon collaborative research. The legacy lives on. Handa Image Gallery. The final images shimmer before us like memories settling into peaceful dreams, each one a window into moments that shaped not just a war, but the very nature of human innovation. Here stands a weathered wooden desk, scarred by years of urgent calculations. Merle Tuver's coffee-stained notebooks still open to pages filled with equations that once seemed impossible. The handwriting grows more confident as the entries progress, from tentative theories to breakthrough moments, from "what if we could" to "today we proved that." The desk lamp casts the same warm glow it did during those long nights when the future hung in the balance, when mathematics became hope, when theory transformed into salvation, moving deeper into memory, We find ourselves in a vast factory hall, now silent, but still echoing with the phantom sounds of 10,000 women working in perfect synchronization. Their workstations remain precise and orderly, each one a testament to the extraordinary ordinary people who built miracles with their hands. The assembly line stretches into shadows, carrying whispers of conversations they could never have, about work they could never fully understand, yet performed with dedication that changed the world. The light shifts, revealing a combat photographer's collection, black and white images that capture the proximity fuse in action. Though the technology itself remains invisible, we see the results: the protected convoys, the defended cities, the grateful faces of sailors who never knew why their anti-aircraft guns suddenly became so deadly accurate. These photographs tell a story of effects without causes, of salvation without explanation, of lives saved by secrets they would not learn for years to come. In the corner, a display case holds the personal effects of Harry Diamond, his slide rule worn smooth by countless calculations, his security badge, faded now but once the key to America's most classified project, a letter from his wife, understanding his long absences, his distracted dinners, his inability to share the weight of responsibility he carried. These intimate objects remind us that every great technological leap requires not just brilliant minds, but patient hearts, supportive families, and the quiet sacrifice of normalcy in service of extraordinary purpose. The gallery's lighting grows softer, more contemplative, as we encounter images from the first post-war symposiums, scientists finally able to speak freely, sharing knowledge that had been locked away for years. Their faces show relief, pride, and something deeper: the satisfaction of secrets finally transformed into shared wisdom. Conference rooms filled with eager listeners, learning how the impossible had been made routine, how collaboration had triumphed over individual genius, how democracy's greatest strength lay not in its weapons, but in its willingness to trust ordinary people with extraordinary responsibility. Here, preserved under gentle light, are the enemy intelligence reports. German and Japanese analysts struggling to understand why Allied anti-aircraft fire had become so devastatingly effective. Their frustration evident in increasingly desperate theories, wild speculation about new explosives, revolutionary timing mechanisms, advanced optical systems, never suspecting that the answer lay in radio waves, in miniaturized electronics, in manufacturing techniques that turned precision instruments into mass-produced weapons. These documents reveal the proximity fuse's greatest success, remaining invisible even as it changed everything. The final images blur together now, like watercolors in gentle rain. Factory workers receiving commendations they could finally understand. Veterans learning for the first time about the secret weapon that had protected them. University professors teaching principles that had once been classified above top secret. Children in science museums, touching replica proximity fuses, learning that the impossible becomes inevitable when brilliant minds work together with common purpose. The museum grows quiet around us, respectful of the journey from secrecy to knowledge, from military necessity to civilian progress. The proximity fuse story continues in every radar system, every collaborative research project, every innovation that builds upon shared wisdom rather than guarded secrets. The legacy flows forward, like knowledge itself, patient, persistent, transformative. These final images fade into peaceful darkness, carrying with them the gentle certainty that human ingenuity, when guided by noble purpose, when supported by democratic trust, when enhanced by collaborative spirit, creates not just better weapons, but better worlds. The gallery lights dim, the displays settle into restful silence, and the story of the proximity fuse becomes part of the larger story of human progress, moving from the urgent mathematics of wartime, through the patient craftsmanship of ordinary heroes, into the peaceful promise of knowledge shared freely. Wisdom passed gently from one generation to the next, like dreams themselves, flowing quietly, inevitably, toward tomorrow's innovations, toward tomorrow's collaborations, toward tomorrow's quiet triumphs of human ingenuity over impossible challenges.